Wait. Wait.
Okay, we'll get going in just a minute here. Rebecca, were you able to sign back on?
I'm here.
Sarah, can you turn her volume up just a little bit? Okay, Rebecca, can you try again? You were pretty quiet this last time.
How does that sound?
Yeah, we should be able to hear you. I'll let you know if throughout the meeting we cannot, and then we'll adjust on our side. So
All right,
thank you
thanks.
for the mic check. All right, and it is 6 p.m. I will go ahead and call the regular meeting of Tuesday, March 9th, 2021 to order. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbach,
Present.
Mr. Christensen.
Here.
Ms. Nelson,
Here.
Mr. Mosher,
Here.
Ms. Duncan,
Here.
Ms. Himshoot, Ms. Himshoot.
Sorry, yes, I'm here. I'm unmuted now.
Thank you. And Mr. Knox will be here shortly.
Great, thank you. Any correspondence or agenda changes for this evening? Seeing none, there are no ceremonial matters tonight. Special reports. Do we have any government to government reports tonight? Municipal boards, commissions, committees? Municipal departments? School district? Students? Okay, and then under guests, we do have a report from Joy Mariner from BDO, who has recently completed our CAFR and audit. She just gave the assembly an hour-long work session on the documentation that we just got, and is going to go ahead and give a 5-minute overview for the listening public tonight on the audit and its findings, or lack of in this instance. So thank you for joining us again, Joy, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And nice to see some of you again after a short break. So for those of you who are participating from the public, my name's Joy Mariner. I'm an audit partner with BDO. We're based in Anchorage, and I've been working on your audit with the city and borough for quite some time. We had the privilege, which this year really was a privilege, to come to Sitka in October, be on site for the audit. We all quarantined and got tested and came down. Your team was, as usual, fantastic to work with. And we had an excellent audit process. It's a lot that goes into an audit. It's even a lot more when you have the audit concurrent with getting a lot of CARES money into the hands of the public, and addressing the pandemic as best as possible. And so I was really impressed with the team. There was also just a transition this year in a lot of positions at the borough, city and borough, and we didn't have any issues with the audit overall. Things went very well. We were able to get access to the books and records that we needed to review. We test a lot of samples. We look at utility bills, and we look at property taxes, and we look at the assessed values, making sure they match the assessment rolls, and we test your cash accounts, and we look at your sample of all your expenses, and we look at samples of revenue, and we look at your receivables, and just a lot of accounts and records that we examine as part of our audit. Your team was fantastic, and we did issue a clean or an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, as well as an unmodified opinion on your compliance with the federal and state major programs that we tested as part of our grant compliance test work. So, ultimately, overall, that's really excellent news. It's exactly what you as the listening public would want to hear from the auditor. We do hit your team with a lot of requests, and they shine through it just great. I will say that every person here at the City and Borough of Sitka is responsible for an accurate financial statement. Anybody who signs a timesheet or spends money or receives money into the borough is part of making sure that the financial records are accurate. And so, really hands off to the whole group. I know it has not been an easy year in a lot of ways, but we're happy to be able to issue this opinion. It will get submitted to the federal government, to the state government, to your bondholders, obviously we've already issued and discussed it with the assembly. As always, I work for the assembly and for you as the people of the city and borough of Sitka. It's important to me that you have accurate financial information, and the CAFR will be, that's the financial report. The comprehensive annual financial report will be available online to you for your review. And I believe that's all of the things I wanted to cover. Any questions or comments?
Great, thank you for that overview. I do appreciate it. I guess I didn't realize a minute ago when I said, hey, we'll see you again soon, that it was going to be in 5 minutes soon. But this time we'll see you again soon in next year. So do appreciate your time this evening, and I know our staff will be in touch with you when they do have questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So then that brings us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item off of tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes. Is there anyone who'd like to speak tonight? You can stand, just make sure the microphone's turned on there. The red light needs to be on. It's at the very bottom.
There we
There you
go.
are.
Two things. My name's Jay Erie, and I'd like to wish heartfelt thanks for International Women's Day yesterday. And something that's now a new subject. It's related to ballast water discharge. Regardless of who does bulk water discharge here, I'd like to see some type of 2 to 3 stage filtration sterilization of all ballast discharge water of ships and water barges. We have quite a few $1 million worth of hatchery fish around here, plus all the wild stock that could be potentially contaminated by anything. There.
Great, thank you. Anyone else, persons to be heard this evening?
Richard Ween. As a matter of fact, I think Jay's suggestion about having filtered ballast and having some of those rules, I think, was a most excellent suggestion. When I see Joy Mariner and BDO, one of the things that come to my mind was when they were here one year, I asked her about BDO and a dashboard, financial dashboard, which we could use as a city in order to know real-time changes. And one of the things that I was delighted to hear, and I heard it at a prior meeting, was that there was apparently some dashboard movement afoot. And one of the things I would like to ask the Assembly and the Administrator is to get a report on the status of this dashboard, because apparently it was also tuned into our own financial computer things. On another note is that in Merck, Ridgeback Biotherapeutics, that's for Stan if he wants to look up the stock, that they have what might be somewhat of a little bit of a game changer in medication, antiviral called Molnupiravir. So keep your eye out for that. It could be, as they say, a potential game changer. Of interest, and I always have interest since in part since we talk about commodities, a lot here. Just to let you know, West Texas Intermediate is $64 a barrel and Brent is 67.5. Now you have to understand something, that the OPEC plus has not met yet, but they're not going to be increasing productions per se. And what happens most recently is the Houthis from Yemen are bombing oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. And to me, these are all examples of economic supply and demand. And all of these things will have their reach into Sitka because it will affect our movement of goods and services throughout the region. And I think we have to keep that in mind. We do not live in a vacuum. Some interesting fun fact is lithium. There's only a very finite quantity here on this planet, and it represents 0.0007% of the Earth's crust. And since I love commodities, I will invite everybody to look at what the cost is to obtain it and to bring it to market.
Any other persons to be heard this evening? All right, that'll bring us to consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda consisting of item A, approve the minutes of the February 18th, 23rd, and 25th Assembly meetings. Item B, approve the new standard marijuana cultivation facility license applications for AKO Farms LLC, DBA AKO2 at 213 Price Street. approve a transfer of ownership application from Anna M. Cleaver, DBA Wood Dudes, to Wood Dudes Incorporated, DBA Wood Dudes at 1321 Sawmill Creek Road, Suite J and K. And item D, approve a liquor license renewal applications for the Channel LLC, DBA Channel Club at 2906 HPR.
Second, thank you for reading all that.
And a clerical note for the record, on item C, it is transferring from Anna M. Cleaver, DBA Weed Dudes to Weed Dudes Incorporated, not Wood Dudes, which was read. So I think that's important for the record, but thank you for reading that as well. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda this evening?
Just a comment on item C and D. Item C, Michelle Cleaver should get anything she wants, and so I certainly approve of this. She is a definite pioneer and just an incredible entrepreneur and a woman. On D, I'm very happy that they are, meaning Channel Club is pursuing their liquor license. I hope that means some good food in the future. And I hope all of this goes very well for them, because I drive by the place and I want to pull into the parking lot and get some dinner. So thank you.
Is there any other public comment on the consent agenda this evening? Sarah?
Okay, on the motion to approve the consent agenda consisting of items A, B, C, and D, Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot, Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
and Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Board Commission Committee appointments, item E.
I move to reappoint Chris Yestad to a 2-year term on the Gary Paxton Industrial Park Board and Robert Sam to a 3-year term on the Historic Preservation Commission as the Sitka Tribe of Alaska representative.
Second.
Is there any public comment to the reappointments of these two individuals?
Richard Ween. I've been to enough GPIP meetings to know that Chris is a solid participant and member, and happy that he re-upped. And as far as Robert Sam goes, there would be no historic preservation meeting or many other things without his presence. And even if he didn't up, I would still recommend he be appointed just for good measure, because he is an enormous resource of knowledge to this community.
Any other comments to the reappointments? Assembly deliberation? Sarah?
Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
and Ms. Nelson.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0 on item E.
Item F.
I move to appoint Stephanie Hani to an unexpired term on the Health Needs and Human Services Commission, and Geraldine Lau to a 3-year term on the Local Emergency Planning Committee under Category 2, Law Enforcement, Civil Defense, Firefighting, First Aid, Local Environmental Hospital, and Transportation Personnel.
Second.
It's been moved and second to appoint these two people to some committees. Is there any public comment?
It's always interesting to read the bios of those, Richard Ween. It's always interesting to read the bios of those who apply for commissions. I think that the first individual, Stephanie Horney, for Health Needs and Human Services, she's new to Sitka. And she's apparently with Search working for Ravensway, which is good. But what is even, I'll call it even better, that she wants to hit the ground running and contribute to the community. So I think that's very hopeful and great. I also believe she is in the audience, so I may not be speaking out of turn if the mayor might ask her to come up. Geraldine Lux wants to be on the LEPC, and she has a lot of experience within the LEPC venue, and especially the enforcement part in which she would be taking part in. She was on TSA from 2017 to present. And so she has a lot of really good experience. And I do not know if she is here. But if she is, I'd love to have her say hello to the town. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment on these appointments? Assembly discussion? Sarah?
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
and Mr. Knox.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0 on item F.
That brings us to unfinished business, item G.
I move to approve ordinance 2021-04 on second and final reading, amending Title 13, Port and Harbors of the Sitka General Code by amending Chapter 13.12 Enforcement at Section 13.12.050 Fines.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on this ordinance? I even asked. Seeing none. Back to the assembly. Sarah?
Okay, on the motion to approve this ordinance on second and final reading, Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
and Mr. Mosier.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0 on item G.
That'll bring us to item H. Sarah, I understand that Fred Paley plans to participate via Zoom. Is he online right now? Okay, so he can hear this going on. Great. So item H, please.
I move to approve a purchase agreement for raw water in bulk for export between the city and borough and Sitka and Arctic Blue Waters Alaska Incorporated as recommended by the Gary Paxton Industrial Park Board, and to authorize the municipal administrator to execute the document.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded for item 21-029. Before public comment and assembly deliberation, I just do want to let everyone know that while the assembly had originally had this item coming back on March 23rd, there is a conflict on March 17th with Mr. Paley and a potential customer. So the GPIP board was able to meet before that. And that's why the item has come back to the assembly a little bit earlier than we had originally anticipated. So is there any public comment on this purchase agreement?
Do we want to have Gary talk to it at all before then?
Good evening, Richard Ween. This has to do with item H, Arctic Blue Water. Within the various documents, it basically has not changed since we have seen it last. The GPIP board enumerated 3 items, one which included that there will be a 48-month to provide design and construction documents. Well, that's 4 years. And to me, It is again making Sitka water a commodity. And in the previous meeting, when this was brought up, I brought up the notion of just having the water store, and that anyone who wishes to buy any amount of water up to 8.9 billion gallons or whatever, put up their money, and then after a certain amount of time, they either pick it up or lose the option. And the notion becomes this way they don't have to, meaning Arctic Blue doesn't have to put up any money. When they get all their ducks in a row, they come here to the water store and buy it. In addition, it will be forever at market. And so that will be an important thing. We saw in the packet some incredible revenue forecasts. And I remember when it was at 1 cent and we were going to pay for it, it was like close to $100 million that they were promising us. And now it's 48 million, whatever, but it doesn't make a difference. This is a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And all these promises are kind of nothing when it comes to the fact that they can control the water. The second issue was climate change. Now that's an awful lot, a big topic, but the way GPIP answered was not really to the point. It is not just water over the dam. One, that amount of water is almost equivalent to a drought. What is the effect of that water being removed from the downstream area? It is an anadromous stream. That's number one. It also, fresh water will affect the hydrology at the mouth of the river there. And it also, in some way, may affect the hatchery. So when you talk about climate change and all these other things, you need to include all of these things. And the last one was the CBS permits. They put in the law in there, and at least the way I read it, with their rebuttable assumptions and beneficial use, I just have to say it ain't going to work because we're trying to sell it, and the beneficial use is to the stream. So I don't think they're going to take it away. And at the end of the day, I'd like to see the state do it. And to them, I would say the famous Greek line, "Molin Yabe."
Is there any other comments tonight on this purchase agreement? All right, bring it back to the assembly for any deliberation.
We asked Gary to come up from the.
Yeah, if you have questions for him.
Well, or more just kind of tell us where we are right now and give us a recap of what happened at the GPIP meeting.
Sure. Hi, Gary White with GPIP. So yeah, we tried to go back and answer your questions here last time, and some of the things that came up were, one, you're talking about the length of the contract. And even though this is a 20-year contract, and as we talked about last time, Mr. Paley is asking for a 20-year contract because he has to go and borrow a tremendous amount of money to put in the remaining infrastructure to get this water from the lake really to a ship. Currently, the city and borough's water delivery infrastructure does not work. We don't have the ability to take water out of the penstock, out of the lake, anywhere. We also do have no ability to take water from the penstock, or I'm sorry, slow down here. We can't get water into the raw water line, and we can't get water from the raw water line to a ship. So if we really wanted to have a water store, city and borough would have to go invest millions of dollars to bring this very speculative venture forward. But to get back to this contract, this isn't really a 20-year contract. It's a 20-year contract if they perform. If they don't perform, the city and borough gets their water rights back, and we have the ability to do so. Within 48 months, they have to come forward and provide all the design and construction documents. In 60 months, they have to actually, in 5 years, they actually have to move water to get it to move or not. And let's just say that after 5 years, they move the minimum amount of 50 million gallons. Well, then they don't get that entire 2 billion gallons, or if they've exercised their option to get the other 6.8, per the contract and the different stages we have, they only get like 335 million gallons of water, which allows the city and borough to enter into multiple contracts. City and borough can enter into a multiple contract immediately. If another gentleman came to the GPIP board next week and wanted a water allocation, we could give them 770 some million gallons. And then in 5 years, we could give them potentially another 8 billion gallons. So the contract's been structured to allow if a client is actually succeeding, then yeah, we're going to gain a whole bunch of revenue because that's what we want. And if they're not, then we have the ability to either terminate that contract or enter another enter another agreements. So hopefully I covered that topic for you guys, that I don't feel it's really a 20-year contract. It's a short contract. It is 20 years if they perform, and it allows them to go get investments. We tried to address the climate change thing. There's a number of provisions in section 4 of the contract that allows the city and borough to not deliver water. It has terms in there multiple times that it's at the sole discretion of the administrator. So if we don't have enough water for our hydros, we can shut it down. If we don't have enough water for drinking, we can shut it down. If we don't have enough water to raise fish, we can shut it down. There's multiple things that we can do. And frankly, if there's a huge climate change thing where we don't have the water, the state has in our permits, which is called the old rule curve, which is it manages lake levels. And if we start getting below those levels, guess what? We're not producing hydroelectricity. We're not having drinking water. We're in some big trouble if that happens. But there's plenty of off ramps before that allows the administrator to not be able to deliver water. And so the other question you had was on the permits. We did look at the permits, and in, I want to say 2013, the city and borough went back to the State of Alaska Department of Natural Resources and asked for dual uses of this water. So for instance, permit LAS 199-19668, I think it is, there's about 14,000 acre feet of water. Well, what we asked for, what the city and borough asked for, was to be able to use that for hydro if they need it. Same with the other ADL permit. So we always have the ability now to say that we are demonstrating use for this water. And so, and part of the city's water agreements, there's always a guaranteed amount of water that goes into that river to manage the fish habitat. So the fish habitat gets the water before our hydro, before our drinking. That fish habitat trumps any use of that water by the city and borough. So we think we've put a good contract here. Mr. Paley's group was one of the groups that came forward and proposed on this. We haven't had a proposal in a while. I have had some conversations with other groups since then that are coming forward because they've heard about it in the news. I have not received any official proposals. They are free to do so. We would gladly take them. Like I said, we do have some 700 million gallons also available. But if Mr. Paley's successful, there might not be more allocation. If he is, well, I hope we're all happy there that we're getting a good value for our water because we're bringing in some substantial revenues. I did do some research on the price of water, and it's all over the board. People are selling water for $300 an acre foot, all the way up to $35,000 for an acre foot. A lot of the higher values of water is they're paying another community so they can take it out of a drainage, versus our water has to be taken from this location. It has to be figured out how to get it out of our lake, basically out of our penstock, onto a boat, and then transported to market. That's why our water is a little bit, I actually think our water is priced appropriate, but if we're looking at other examples, they're not all apples to apples examples. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if the assembly has any.
Thank you for that presentation and the work that your board was able to do in a short time frame here to help satisfy the assembly. Is there any, Kevin Knox?
So we were forwarded an email that you were on, or you were sent by Mr. McGuire. based on what you said here tonight, I feel somewhat more reassured. But I would like to hear from you, just if Mr. McGuire came forward with this proposal that he has here, that you feel like you have some working room to be able to work with another proposal, something like that.
Sure. Well, so we only have, can you guys hear me okay with this thing on? I feel like I'm mumbling.
I don't like the Green Bay thing though.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, we do really only have, I think it's 775 million gallons of water after this with our Eckerd allocation, which isn't a whole lot. And frankly, I like to keep water, a little bit of water set aside in case we do get a water bottle contract. But I haven't had anybody really that's been serious about setting up a water bottling plant in a few years. And based off of past history, I'm not sure that it's economically feasible, but as I said last time, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, according to water. Someone might figure out how to sharpen their pencil and make it work. So we would be giving up that ability. Yeah, it's a tough call. I mean, I would like to be able to work with Mr. McGuire. We have in the past, but I didn't hear anything from him until after this group met.
So with that, I guess the next follow-up on how we end up dealing with this is, and I hate throwing this kind of a question out there, a wrench in the mix, but are we under any obligation on something like this to go out to competitive bidding? If there's multiple people out there that say they want, even though we don't have history or performance metrics to be able to go back and say that, it's possible for multiple groups to even come forward if we only really, to date right now, only have one that's really gotten the farthest ahead, but
right.
Are we under any obligation?
I'm not completely positive on the city's procurement policies, but we have put out RFPs in the past, and we have had people respond. So, I mean, it's been pretty well known the city and borough is looking to enter into water purchase agreements since we've had our allocation. We've always taken them in the past of we've had dual proposals before, and the GPIP board sat down and adjudicated both of them and came up with the one they thought was best for success for the city and borough.
Other questions for Rebecca? You had a question for Gary.
Yeah, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hey, Mr. White, thank you for everything that you've done to get us to this point. I'm concerned, or I guess maybe confused, if we go into this agreement, somebody's going to have to put in quite a bit of infrastructure. So does that infrastructure then become ours? Are we responsible to maintain it? So, there's a lot of cost to it. So does the company who puts it in, if we get a second bidder, do they get to use the first company's infrastructure? Can you address that?
Sure. And so that's where it gets, the city also has protections for that as well. Any section 10 of the contract outlines that if anybody is going to come in and say what Arctic is suggesting is that they're going to put in pumps into the after bay and pump the water, they have to bring their full design and construction documents to the city and borough. They have to approve them. It has to work for what the city and borough has going. So Arctic's actually taking a little bit of a risk here on whether we would even approve their infrastructure. Of course, we probably would want to, but we want to find what fits beneficially for both of us because we want the revenue, and of course they wish to move the water. So we have the ability to control that. We have the ability to I forget the section, but I think it's section 10 that covers all of the tidelands. They're going to have to set up some type of loading infrastructure into our tidelands, and we get to approve all that. And it'll actually come before this body before that happens. Now, to have dual people work, we've had this happen in the past where we could, while they go to make up their agreements, like for instance, when we had our last contract with Alaska Bulk Water, part of our title, I think it was our tideland permit, that we required them that they had to sell to third-party operators. at a certain markup over their cost. And I actually talked to Fred about that this morning, that we would probably go down that same path. So there's multiple ways to control this. And I think, everybody wants to ship water, and I think we're all going to try to work together. But yeah, this is a very complicated thing to put together. I mean, the offset is the city and borough bets on this infrastructure. And I've had people stop me in the street and say, well, why don't we just set up our own structure? I'll tell you flat out is I wouldn't put my own money into it. But if we've got outside investors that believe in it and they want to put in their money, then I'd rather have them take their risk.
That's great. And I'm looking at section 10 right now. I guess I'm concerned, you've already pointed out what a risky venture this is and how much effort has gone into it on Mr. Paley's side. What I don't want is to have a bunch of infrastructure that is marginal or becomes derelict and disused. And so I guess that's a risk that we have to take on our side to match the risk that his company is going to. So I guess that satisfies my questions. Thanks.
Go ahead, Valerie. Sorry, I didn't see you down there.
I just have a concern about this agreement now that these other two people, McGuire and Nunez, have come forward and they say that they'll pay the 1.8 for the infrastructure. And are we giving preferential treatment to somebody that's been there for 20 years that hasn't been able to meet the requirements? I would like to see it a more level playing field. And of course, then there's always the tideland leases. What's going to go on? We're trying to make a haul out there and all that kind of stuff. I'm certainly not an engineer, but I know a lot of people that know a lot about engineering, and they're concerned about what's been happening here. I also think that we as an assembly need to get our act in gear and pass some ordinances about selling our natural resources and whatnot, because right now it's just the administrator can basically do what he wants. If we say, Mr. Leach, go forth and sell all the water you want, or you can, then it comes in 5 years, and with just your say so, it can be extended. So I kind of have issues with that, but I guess I will wait and see what everybody else says. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good meeting we had with the GPIP. I was there, and there's a few things that I kind of want to emphasize a little bit. Like Gary said, the way this thing is structured, they only get, after 5 years, the only allocations they get are based totally on how much they've already sold. So, it's not like it's being locked up for 20 years without doing anything. But let's face it, in order to move water in today's world, somebody's gonna have to spend some real money, and not just here, but also wherever it's going. They have to have tanks to put it in. They've got to have docks to put, and then there's the ship itself and the fuel to move it. So, it's not a simple thing to get done. And I have some sympathy for Mr. Paley. Been trying to get this done. It's not an easy thing to do. And I know we've been trying to move water for a lot of years, but we've also received significant amount of money over the years while they try. I believe about 1.5 million. Is that correct? And at the end of the day, we're talking about, again, I believe that there was about 10% of the water that goes over the dam is the total amount that we have available for sale. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And again, it's after it goes through the turbines. We've used it already. It's after we've taken our drinking water off, because our drinking water is pulled before the turbines. And if anything happens, we can shut it off. If for any reason we need that, for some reason that's not something we want to have happen because of we're not getting enough water, rainwater or whatever. But as I understand it, every forecast I said is because of global warming, we'll be getting more water, not less. And that may be extremely problematic. This is based on if they're successful, they get allocation. If they're not, we get it back. And I know that last time somebody got upset about the cost that they had in there of a tenth of a penny, I think. And I need to make sure that's clear that that was purely for wash down, for weather cleaning up, just for wash down. If they use more than 50,000 gallons, they have to pay for more, but it's not the money that the water that we're selling. Then finally, in this other proposal, an unsolicited email isn't a proposal. There's no backup to it. There's nothing. And if they are serious, number one, I think they would have gotten something more than just an email saying, I'll pay more. And they would have been here sooner. Where have they been for the last few years? So, would I love it if we got paid more? Yeah, of course. But we have to, be very nice to get some real money. In the meantime, if this doesn't work, which I think is a real possibility, we'll cash some checks and give them a chance. And, even if this doesn't work, again, we're laying the groundwork and people will know. And then maybe Mr. McGuire will be more successful because people have been talking about Sitka water. So, thank you.
Kevin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate everything everyone said. And Gary, thank you for all your hard work. I appreciate it. I do have a lot of reservations about this. Something Valerie said that I was concerned about, but I wasn't going to bring up, and I had forgotten to bring it up, was about giving the administrator sole discretion to just kind of renew at these intervals. I think that would be an assembly decision, but my biggest concern is that and I appreciate you going back to get, to kind of modify this. The 48 months or 4 years does bother me when I was reading this, in that I'm not an engineer. I don't know, a lot about this, but it seems like if this was a true partner in this, they would have the plans already right now, or they would have worked with our public works or other city engineers of some sort to kind of figure out, because we enter an agreement, a binding agreement, and then they come up with a plan at some point within the next 4 years. And what if that plan just doesn't work with us? And it's too big, it's too bulky, it gets in the way of other things going on. And I know that the contract gives us kind of authority over that. It just, the way it's worded doesn't make me feel good, because it feels like even a great contract can get caught up in litigation and cause legal fees and problems. My concern is, why don't we have the plans now? Why? It seems like we should have that figured out before we engage into a commitment for the water. And I know it isn't technically for 20 years because there's these benchmarks, but in a way it is for 20 years. And I'm not trying to be negative. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. You've been tasked with trying to sell water, and you're doing it, and that's great. But it's our job to kind of look at the big picture and say, okay, is this right long-term? Do we feel good about that? And right now, because of the things I said specifically about the engineering that has not been worked out yet, I mean, that's a major fundamental part of how we're going to get. I know it's coming from the Afterbay, which is good, but when you look at a map or Google Earth or whatever, or just go out there, there's a lot of technical things that need to be worked out from the Afterbay to pumping it, where the boat, the size of the boat. It just doesn't seem like they are fully prepared. The estimated projections, I'm not going to say anything about that. My biggest concern is about the logistics of pumping it out. So I feel very uneasy about it right now.
So I just wanted to add, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Kristen.
Kristen?
I had a couple of questions about the memos. So page 3, this note was also on the Eckert agreement, which came up with this figure of 700 to 750 million. And I was just wondering, that was at your recommendation. Where does that come from?
What it comes from is our past water bottling plant we had here, they had an allocation of 400 million gallons. When you start looking at how much water they're going to use to do that, that's a tremendous amount of water to put in bottles. And so my thought was 250 is about right. So we could get 3 water bottling plants going. I was thinking that we could keep our options open. But I think it's always good to have a little bit set aside in case that opportunity does exist, because technology is changing at all times.
Mhm. So we're good there. I see even if they do phase 1, phase 2 plus Eckert, we're at 725. So we're within your recommendation, right?
Yes.
And then I guess I was looking at the Eckerd, also just the contract period. I know that one was an extension saying they weren't able to because, so we extended that out. But when I looked at the actual agreement, it was also the 5-year agreements that could be renewed for a period of 20 years, right?
And this agreement? or
No,
their-
the other one. It looked like they were similar as far as the timeline. I
and
know that was a lot less volume, but as far as I heard the concerns about we can't tie up our water for this period of time, looked like it was broken up into five-year increments. And it looked like it was similar in time period to Eckert, so over 20 years if things work out. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the 5-year extensions are an agreement with both parties, which means it would have to come back in front of the assembly.
Okay,
It's not an automatic.
perfect. Appreciate that.
And I just wanted to say before that, Fred is on here and I asked him to be here to address some of your questions because I think he's willing to maybe work with some of the terms. Because we had the terms that went to the GPIP board and this body has sometimes acted like the GPIP board and that they wanted to negotiate the contracts. And so we have the person here if he wanted to negotiate all that. I just wanted to address Mr. Mosier's point is that you're asking these guys to put in multi-millions of dollars into design and engineering. And why would you do that if you don't have a contract? That's the reason why they're trying to get the contract to be able to move forward. And I wanted to give them time, but I think they might be able to back off some of those timeframes. I just don't want to hog the seat if you guys want me out of here.
Yeah, no, it's much appreciated, Gary. So thank you. Anything else from the assembly on this one? Rebecca?
Sorry, Mr. White, not so fast. So I just want to go back again to, I understand that the contract includes that someone else builds it at their own expense. What happens if the contract ends from their side? Are we the owner?
Of the infrastructure, that's actually a good point. And if you wanted to make a mild change that you could require thinking of bond, what's the bond?
Can I comment on this?
Yeah.
I would suggest that what happens upon termination is it's also premature to put those provisions in this contract. The design and construction plan required to be approved by CBS would have those type of provisions. Because first of all, we need to know if they're going to put some kind of infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure? Is it going to be permanent, a fixture, or is it going to be temporary? Do they want to move it or do they not want to move it? Or it would be hard and expensive to move. And do we want to take the risk of having to retain those if they fail? So it's all those considerations that I would suggest it would be prudent to be addressed in the design and construction plan stage of this proceeding. And I think impliedly that's why that you would normally see in these kind of infrastructure contracts, just what Rebecca is suggesting. You would see those kind of provisions, but under this kind of contract, I don't think it's prudent to do so until we know what's going to be actually what kind of infrastructure is going to be installed. And we can address those at the time of approving the plan, the construction and design plan.
Okay, I guess that satisfies again my question, because if I understand you right, Mr. Hanson, then we would see what they come up with, and under this contract, they're required to show us something that we then approve, and are in the process of approving that, we can determine ownership in the event that they are no longer
So let me give you a scenario to let you think about it. It would be, if you were to approve this contract as it is, then Mr. Paley would run out and try to find an investor who would give him a whole bunch of money. And then once they had that money, they would decide, first of all, how are they going to get the water from the after bay down to the shore, then out to the boat? And that, if they had the money, then they would design that infrastructure to do that. And at that point, they would bring those plans to the city for approval. And at that point, we as a city would go, okay, you're going to just have temporary pipes. And if this contract fails, are you going to take those pipes with you? We would put in that plan. We would make sure they put in that plan what's going to happen with their infrastructure.
So a plan would be legally binding.
Oh, yeah, correct. Yes.
Okay. And then I need to go back with Mr. White to,
Sorry to interrupt.
oh, were you done, Brian?
I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Having someone else use that infrastructure, I know you said you had a conversation this morning with Mr. Paley. I'm a little uneasy with a conversation. If we have a second offer, there's nothing in this contract saying that someone else can use the infrastructure put in by Mr. Paley, correct? So how would we address that? I appreciate that you've thought ahead and you had the conversation, but I want to make sure that we've crossed our Ts.
You're correct. There's nothing in this contract that suggests that, but we have the ability to, in our Tidelands permit, for them to hook up to a ship that we can say, if you want this Tidelands permit, you will, and you're going to have this type of water delivery infrastructure, that you have to do X, Y, and Z. I've always been a big proponent that we never want to give up ownership of the end of the pipe. And so a water delivery infrastructure would be the end of the pipe. Now, granted, they're putting in all of their own capital to build this, so it has to be something that's fair. But that's what we did with True Alaska Bulk Water. We put in a provision that said you are only allowed to mark it up X amount of dollars over the cost of the water, so they can get a return on their investment, and another contractor can come in, or another client has their ability. If you looked at Mr. McGuire's proposal, he was talking about taking water from before the turbine. So he could figure out his own water delivery system, and we could have 2 water delivery systems out there in the bay. That's a potential. But the main thing about having this Tideland permit is we get to make sure that it's not going to interfere with our marine haul out, with Silver Bay Seafoods, anything else. So that's why we did that, because we want to be able to control what goes in our water. I mean, best case scenario is we'd have a pile of cash and we'd develop it ourselves, but I can't recommend that we invest in this right now.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit of the people who are taking these risks. So thank you.
Is there anything else from the assembly on this tonight? If you would like to ask him to speak, but I'm going to leave members of the assembly can also ask questions of members that are participating.
Ms. Paley, do you have anything you wanted to add, or are you good with what we said?
I'll move to suspend the rules to allow Mr. Paley to speak, since we've already closed the public hearing.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to suspend the rules to allow participation by Fred Paley. Is there any public comment? Sarah, is that commentable, or do we just go straight to voting?
You can take public comments.
Okay, public comment?
Just, Mr. Mayor, is it open for me to speak, or sorry?
No, if this motion passes, I will acknowledge you here in a minute, Mr. Paley.
Thank you.
Richard Ween. I think it'd be wonderful that Mr. Paley speaks, and I know that he's been listening here, and hopefully he can fill some of the holes in some of the conversation that's been here and certainly clear up some of my confusion. So thank you for being here, sir.
Is there any other public comment? It appears that this is not a debatable motion. So Sarah?
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Timshute,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiss,
No.
Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
and Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1.
All right, Mr. Paley, thank you for joining us this evening. The Assembly has suspended the rules to allow you to participate in tonight's deliberations. Please, the floor is yours. I do ask that we normally have a 3-minute time limit on persons to be heard. I understand there may be more than that, but I would ask for a timely statement as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll make it brief, members of the Assembly. Yeah, I just wanted to comment, our focus with the approval of this is to go get a contract. And that's the main focus. With the contract, then we intend to work with the engineers out of Juneau in order to put together a plan for the loading side of it. And with the contract and purchase orders, we should have no difficulty in raising the needed finance to take this forward. Now, the idea of the loading facility, we'd be looking at a pipe going out into the bay, similar to what True Alaska or Alaska Bottled Water had, that Terry Trapp had before. It would be a 24-inch HDPE line running out with floats, with a small barge on the end of it. It would be approved by the Assembly before we do it, of course. Is there any questions from anybody that I can answer?
Do we have any questions from the Assembly for Mr. Paley? Okay, sir, thank you for your comments this evening. We do appreciate you calling in.
Thank you.
Anything else from the Assembly before we go to a vote? Sarah?
Okay, on the motion to approve the purchase agreement for raw water in bulk for export between the city of Sitka and Arctic Blue Waters. Ms. Nelson,
No.
Mr. Mosher,
No.
Mayor Eisenbeiss,
No.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Timshute,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Knox.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-3.
Great, thank you. And it is the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break before we come back to our new business items.
Almost asked for because of the early meeting.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, were you able to jump back on?
I am here.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're standing by for one assembly member to be seated and we will jump back into it. Okay, we are back. That will bring us to new business item I, which is a discussion direction decision on RFP options for the sale of the former Sitka Community Hospital site, including the consideration of an advisory vote. We're going to turn this over to John tonight for some information that was contained in our memo. And then I know at the end of this, some direction, potential motion from the assembly is going to be most helpful. This will kind of set up the next 6 to 8 months of John's marching orders. So whichever route we choose to go down tonight, it'd be helpful if we could give our administrator an answer. So with that, John.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll try to get through this as briefly as possible. I tried to outline everything in the memo here that basically summarizes where we are now with progress on the potential hospital sale. And I referred back to the old memo where I said this was a best case scenario timeline. Well, we've run into our first speed bump, I'll call it, where we're trying to get an independent appraisal completed, and the earliest we can get an appraiser here is the end of March. We've been assured that we will have an appraisal figure ready by mid-April, but I want to keep this process moving. And in this downtime while we're waiting for that appraisal, there's some work that we can complete instead of drawing the full timeline out. And an important decision that we'd like to have settled on tonight is whether or not the assembly desires to go to an advisory vote, given that we are going through a full competitive RFP process. So I've laid out 3 options for you and how it would look. The first one is an RFP with no advisory vote. I've sketched out some rough dates there where it essentially says we're going to come back to you in mid-April with an RFP. We'll advertise for the 60 days. We'll come back. We'll present, if someone is selected, we'll present some terms to the assembly, and then we would, if we decide to move forward, then we'll proceed with a sales ordinance. Option 2 is we do that same process, but then we also have the public advisory vote. And I didn't sketch out a timeline for that because it depends on, do you want to do the advisory vote in while we're working through this pre-sale process? And then that leads to the question, like, why would I work through the pre-sale process if we're still going to have a vote? And then is it going to be a special election? Are we going to try to get it in on the regular election? So I've kind of sketched out some costs and some timelines to if we were to go to a special election. And then in the third option, I've offered up that we can continue with the pre-sale work. And as we are developing this RFP, which is pretty close to, I would say it's probably at about the 75% right now. As we develop this RFP in lieu of a advisory vote, since it is an advisory vote, we could hold 2 public hearings. And I know all the assembly members want to have more assembly meetings on top of the assembly meetings we've already been having. But this would offer 2 opportunities. We'll publicize it as well as we can. But the first meeting would be next Tuesday, and then another one 2 weeks after that, where the public would have the opportunity to just come and speak to the assembly on their concerns about the sales action. Do they approve of it, disapprove of it? We're not necessarily looking for the who, but we're looking for their concerns with the actual sale. If the assembly is comfortable with that, we can listen to those hearings also, and then take that input with assembly guidance and build that into the RFP to make sure we're addressing the public concern. And then bring that RFP back in mid-April as in timeline number 1 and proceed with the RFP process. So hopefully I've summarized it all for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you for that, John. Assembly, Valerie?
I don't have any questions, but I do have comments. And I know you weren't here when the whole hullabaloo went along and people came and testified against search taking over Sitka community and all that kind of stuff. The public is still pissed and they feel they were very disenfranchised because several people sitting at this table had direct conflict of interest because a spouse worked at search or got a job at search and on and on and on. Somebody did charters for search. And so there are a lot of hard feelings. And my personal preference would be to do an advisory vote and do it when we have the October election, unless search is like so in a rush like they were before to get it through that we have to get it in before we get new people on the assembly. I'm just totally against that. I think it was wrong what happened the last time, and I would rather see an advisory vote in October, even though it's not binding. Thank you.
Question for him. So John, as I understand it, if we're going to do an advisory vote, would we approve the RFP, the response to the RFP, the proposal, before it went to the vote? So in other words, if it's too low, I mean, if we just say, we're not even gonna, we're just to say no. So that we're not locked into going to a public vote on whatever is proposed. And that would make me a little bit nervous if we lock ourselves in like that. And if it's, so low that we don't think it's even worth going to a vote for. And then as a comment, I wish we could decide after we get the RFP, because it would depend on how much what the proposal is to me. If the proposal is $100 million, I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll take that. Or if it's $1, then yeah, no, we at the very least would have to go to a public vote.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and I'll look to Brian for some help here, because we did discuss this quite a bit on, the assembly by code has to authorize me to basically move forward with this sale, correct, Brian, by ordinance. Now, we haven't really moved forward with any sale yet. You directed me to go and start the pre-sale process. And it's my belief that that ordinance would come after we decided to move forward with one of the proposals. I think your other concern is whether or not the proposal is good. And I think that's where the assembly plays a part in helping develop this RFP, and maybe even the public plays a part in helping develop this RFP, which is why I'm going out to get the independent appraisal right now. If the assembly so desires, we can set a minimum bid price based on that appraisal to make sure that we address your concern. And I'm not saying we will do that. I'm just saying that is an option. That's something you could put into the RFP. Did I miss anything, Brian?
Kevin?
I'll just keep my comments brief. I understand what Valerie's talking about. In this instance, I would prefer to do option 3, which is recommended by the staff, to do the RFP with public hearings in lieu of an advisory vote. It allows us to move on with this a little faster, but it does allow people from the public to speak out and let their opinions be known. I think that's a compromise there, and that's what I would prefer. Thank you.
Crystal?
I was just curious, the public meetings that we're going to hold, do we just move into session and then people come and they provide 3 minutes worth of testimony? Is that what that looks like?
Generally speaking, yes. I'm going to have to ask Sarah the actual mechanics of how that works. But I imagine it's just the assembly here at the table, and the public gets an opportunity to come up and speak with some time limit associated.
So if we approve that tonight, then we would start advertising tomorrow to let people know that they can show up on Tuesday to provide feedback.
Absolutely.
And then I saw the 2 letters that came from Search saying we'd like to move forward with possibly purchasing. But did they provide any timelines? I know the last time we had a discussion, there was, if we move on this timeline, we might be able to do a vote in October, but I'm not saying that they were rushed. Did they provide any feedback on when they hope to complete this purchase with the city or just on our own timeline?
Well, they haven't responded to that, and I think that might potentially be an overreach if they kind of drove our timeline. Really, their request was, we would like to buy this property, and then the assembly directed me to go out and do the competitive bid process. And I think we get to set the terms on that competitive bid process, and the assembly decides when and how, and if they even want to sell that facility. So I think we drive the timeline, not the proposer,
I was just
although they have
wondering-
specific desires.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they weighed in because they had alluded to they wanted to do major construction. And so I wasn't sure if they had a timeline of when they wanted to start that, knowing that the hospital is also something that they're going to be undertaking in a couple of years. And just to disclose, I am not a Search employee, even though I'm up here wearing a Search coat. But I do work for ANTHC and they do house me on their campus. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Thanks so much.
Rebecca?
Yeah, my only question really, I guess, Mr. Leach, is how is the appraisal going? What's the status of that? And then is that information public information when it's complete?
The appraisal has not begun yet. That'll start at the end of March. But we have somebody on the hook to complete that. There are a couple routes we can go with that. But I would recommend that we discuss some of those things in executive session as we develop a strategy on how we put forward that RFP. Kind of hold some of our cards close as we get into some potential negotiations.
Okay, and I guess I think I'm with Mr. Mosher on this one. I'm going to take the staff recommendation and I will be supporting option 3. I think it's really important, like Ms. Nelson said, to have public input, and that allows for that without necessarily, I don't ever want to say that a vote is something that bogs us down, but it does allow us to get the input that we need to make a good decision without necessarily having to hold the formality of a vote. So thank you.
Kevin?
And then interest of moving the discussion forward, I'll put out a motion here, but I'll also disclose that my wife works for Search, has for years. I've, in my head, have been struggling a little bit with how to address Ms. Nelson's concern about any perceived conflict of interest. There never has been and never will be any changes in my wife's employment or anything else, with regards to how this all happened. So, or what happened with Sitka Community Hospital. It had nothing to do with any of that. But moving forward, I move to direct the municipal administrator to proceed with option 3.
Second.
It's been moved and forward to proceed with option 3, an RFP with public hearings in lieu of advisory vote. Is there any public comment?
Well, so for tonight, it says 0 citizens, 1, I don't know who.
Your name for the record, please.
I'm sorry, Richard Ween. I have been all along against the sale of the hospital. If you look at all three of the options, even though this is for number three, it's all sale, sale, sale. I've been there when the hospital was for sale and we had all these public meetings, but they were really not of, they were more orchestrated than not. And so I don't have much faith in them. My notion has been and will always be that this is an opportunity to lease. Give the building if you want. You don't need an
And sir,
appraisal.
the motion on the floor is to go forward with the public
Yeah.
hearings in lieu of advisory vote. We're not
Thank
talking
you.
about leases tonight.
Okay, thank you. Regardless, I am totally against that option that the motion states, that it is something that is not the preferable movement forward. And I don't think it is in the best interest of the city to proceed that way. And let's make it 0 for 2.
Is there any other comment on RFP with public hearings in lieu of advisory vote? Seeing none, we'll come back to the assembly. I am going to jump in here just as I didn't before the motion was made. So I see this 2 ways here. Number one, RFP with no advisory vote is instantly off the board for me. I don't, and I guess I need to get back to just the RFP with public hearings. So I agree with the RFP with public hearings. I believe that public hearings actually give the opportunity for more input than simply a vote. To me, a vote is going to tell us, do you want to sell the building? Yes or no? And that's the only question that we're going to get answered. If we do public hearings, people will have 2 opportunities plus some through emails and contacts to tell us their thoughts on this as opposed to yes or no. So I think we actually get a more robust public hearing process through this route as opposed to a vote, which is advisory in nature only and completely non-binding. So anyone else from the assembly? Tor?
Yeah, I'm kind of of 2 minds about this. I understand what you're saying about the public hearings and that might actually have more discussion about it, but I'm just a little bit hesitant to not have a public vote on a major sale like this, with the caveat that I wouldn't support going to hearings or going to a public vote if the proposal is not sufficient. If the proposal is not, in my mind at least, sufficient for the property, then we stop the process. I mean, and I guess as long as we have in either one of these scenarios, as long as we have that ability, then I would be okay with doing the public hearings, although my preference probably actually would be going to a public vote.
Valerie?
So by my count, it looks like the public's going to be shortchanged again because you're going to go to public hearings in lieu of an advisory vote. Those hearings look like they're going to be March 16th and March 30th when everybody's very busy with their herring battles or herring fisheries, tax preparation. And I just think that it's too short of a time span and not enough notification to get true public input. I think the advisory vote, if it's non-binding, you get an idea of where the community feels and how they feel about what happened 2 years ago. Thanks.
Crystal?
Yeah, I have a question about the timeline. The April 13th, I read in the memo that mid-April is what we heard back, but we're guaranteed to get it before April 13th so that when it comes to us, that incorporates that information.
The idea is after the 2 public hearings, we'll incorporate as much as we can into that draft RFP and we'll present it to you as early as possible. But that's the draft we will be discussing on the April 13th agenda.
Just for clarification, so you're saying we'll have the first public hearing next week? Without the assessment?
Correct. While we're working on that assessment, that's the input we'd like to hear from the public. And I understand the timeline is quick. I'm open to changes in this timeline too. I was just looking at moving the process forward as quickly as possible. But if we need to push the schedule to the right, that's completely fine. And we can advertise them at a later date. And I'm open to other ideas if this doesn't fit.
Mr. Rebecca?
So Mr. Leach, is there a hybrid option? Is it possible to add some public comment again after April 13th? And then I guess that would, then we're stuck with a second draft and that slows everything down. And then the other question is, could we do a hybrid of public comment and a vote?
I mean, I guess the best answer I could give you is yes. And I think the assembly owns this process, and you can have as many public hearings as you want, and you can still have that advisory vote if you'd like. The only hard deadline I would put out there is the July 27th deadline for the ordinance to have it introduced on the regular election if we were to go to an advisory vote. Otherwise, there would have to be a special election.
Thanks. I think I'm going to stick with option 3. Thank you.
And Kevin?
Yeah, and I just, the purpose of these hearings in my mind is to hear, do we want to sell or not? It's not necessarily to a specific group, even though we know that Surge is interested. Any type of opinion from the public surrounding that, like possible values that they think that the hospital, if it should be sold, what they think the value should be, or not that the people are assessors, but just kind of a general framework of what people are thinking about whether we should sell or not. Thank you.
John?
I just have one more bit I want to throw in here. And again, Brian, please step in if I get something wrong here. But I know there's been some concern over the RFP and are we going to be committed to something? And that would be one of the reasons why we would have the vote. But that RFP can have language in there that the assembly can hold the right to reject all bids if they so desire. And that's something we can develop as we build this RFP and come forward with those drafts.
Rebecca, please.
Yeah, sorry to ask for more time. I mean, since it's our process, we've done some things in the Sitka School District where the public has been able to weigh in through technology. Is there a way to open a, so to speak, informal vote using software where we can collect basically a tally at some point in this process?
Rebecca, are you talking about like a survey, like an online survey that people, a real informal survey?
Mm-hmm. Not necessarily even SurveyMonkey. I mean, that might work, but just having on the city website for people that this is important to, they would be able to go on the city website or go in even to City Hall if we're in a COVID safe, green mitigation level and be able to provide input that way. I don't want the public not to be included in this. But I also feel like a vote doesn't tell us everything we want to know. So I'm looking for a solution maybe to be able to do both at various time points through the process. Any thoughts?
Help me, clerk.
Or Brian, do you have any legal opinion on an informal vote that could be even a yes and a no on a sale? Is there anything you can think of at the at this time that would prevent us or preclude us from doing that?
I guess not. I mean, you could do an informal thing where you say for the next 2 weeks, you can send in a yes or a no online or drop off a note at the city hall. I mean, that's just another way of telling your government what you want, and you could promote that if you'd like.
It's very convenient that Amy Ainsley's in the crowd right now and is probably really good at doing surveys like this if necessary.
Yeah, and Amy would have a better take on this than I necessarily, but I know that one of the concerns around doing informal things like that is, they can be weighted. Certain groups can band together to be able to, multiple vote from individuals or other things like that. I mean, it's not an easy thing to control necessarily. I mean, you can get something out of it, but what does it really mean in the end? That's the bigger question.
That was going to be my input as well. I mean, as long as I think the assembly would understand that it's not any official vote, it can be weighted. It would be somewhat similar to a person's to be heard or a hearing, where if there's one side that's passionate about one of the sale versus no sale, you might have a large crowd in here, and that other crowd might be the one that control the online. I mean, I don't see any resource concerns, but as long as I think we're not treating it as an official election and just using as a temperature gauge kind of, I think it can be done.
I want to throw something out just for consideration here, because I think it was mentioned earlier about a quick timeline on the hearings. And it got me to thinking that I kind of do want, well, no, because we're not going to necessarily release an appraisal price either. But my train of thought there was to have a public hearing, end of April timeframe, once we had some more financial information about the building, to see what the public thought about that. But I think that gives away some proprietary information that could be extremely helpful for us in selecting an RFP. So I don't know that necessarily works either. Maybe I was just scared of having another meeting or two in March, with as busy as March has already been. But I think just trying to make sure that we have the most comments in during this time period as possible. Sure.
It just maybe make a suggestion that we do one meeting before the RFP goes out and one after, because then people would have more information about, what the sale would look like. They wouldn't know exactly, but, and then of course, we would have public meetings when the RFP is out and back as to whether or not to accept it, which I think we probably should, if not have a special meeting, make sure it's the main, the only item on there, or one of the few items on the agenda. But that's just a thought. I mean, right now, I still like my preference of having a vote, but I don't have super strong feelings about it. But if we are going to do the meetings, maybe split them up before and after the RFP. Is just a thought.
Yeah, because it would give us April 13th, when the draft RFP is presented to us. That's opportunity for public comment as well, once that draft is out. So
I was just going to say, sorry, on that online thing, I don't know that it's required, but if, when people do persons to be heard, they're required to say who they are. We could have it, if it's possible, I don't know if it is, so that when someone's posting a comment that they put their name, so that we can't just have random people making anonymous comments, that you're going to speak on this issue, you identify who you are, so that, we know, and we can, that's, if we can require it here, there should be no reason why we shouldn't require it online. I'm not dead set on having online thing. I was just a thought on that if we do it.
Crystal?
Yeah, so right now, as far as receiving feedback, we have 2 possible public hearings where they could come and they can testify, they can phone in, they can participate in person, they have options there. And then they can always reach out to us as the assembly via email. And then when the RFP comes before the assembly, that will be another opportunity for them to weigh in. Is that correct?
That's correct and a great point. You have, if we were to just follow this timeline, and I'm only using these dates because they're here, March 16th would be a public input opportunity. March 30th would be a public input opportunity. When we bring forward the draft RFP, there would be a public input opportunity on the content of the RFP. It would get advertised. As the team completes the evaluations, we would come back with a proposal. That would be another opportunity for public input. And then sales terms being presented, if we move forward, that would be an opportunity for public input. And then when the actual sales ordinance is presented, that would be another opportunity for public input.
Is there anything else on the motion to continue forward with public hearings in lieu of an advisory vote? Sarah?
Mayor Eisenbach,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
No.
Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
No.
Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Mr. Mosier,
Yes.
and Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
The motion passes 5-2.
Brings us to item J, a discussion direction decision on the creation of a tourism master plan. We have 2 co-sponsors on this, and then if the assembly decides that this is a reasonable step, a potential motion to have planning commission work on this master plan. So I don't know if Rebecca or Kevin wants to start this discussion out.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to if you're ready
Please.
for me. Right, so the purpose behind this is to ask the Planning Commission to put together a process to gather input from Sitkans to kind of steer Sitka for the next few years. This is not something that's intended to not ever be updated or to, the duration of it is, I'm thinking something like 5 years or so. And the idea is to get consultation from Sitkans on how we best want to make Sitka welcoming for our visitors while also maintaining our quality of life and the character of our community. So we have heard we may have a major influx of visitors as soon as 2022. And I'm thinking about questions like transportation of the visitors, transportation for Sitkans, how do we manage traffic flow? How do we, do we need to disperse visitors somehow? I'm trusting the Planning Commission to be able to come up with both some really valuable ideas, but also a really good process that will include a variety of opinions and voices in Sitka. So again, the goal here is to maintain our quality of life, to maintain the character of our community, but also make our community welcoming to visitors. So how do we do that? And I envision something that would address what we do when there are 1,000 visitors in town and when there are 10,000 visitors in town. So we have a predictable schedule of when those people will be here. How do we make our town work for them and ourselves? So this is to ask the Planning Commission to come up with something, I'm thinking by maybe December, that's representative of the community, that we could then take forward as we go into what we hope is a busy season in 2022.
Thank you. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Rebecca lined it out quite nicely, and I do have a great deal of faith in the fact that our planning commission and our planning department would do a really good job at something like this, and gathering public input and other things like that. I think it's, it's a bit overdue, but we certainly can't afford to put it off anymore either. If predictions are going to be like they are, they're saying, 400,000 people into Sitka in 2022, that that'd be a major shift for us to undertake. So I think it's important that we really start to dig in on this and do it soon.
Discussion on the creation of a tourism master plan. Kevin.
I like this idea. I think it's very necessary and forward thinking. So I would definitely support this. The only thing I would ask that, the planning commission in doing this, that they come back to the assembly from time to time so we can give our input, so it's a give and take, not just doing all this work and then throwing it at us at the last minute. If we can work together, that would be optimal.
Valerie?
I don't like the idea of directing the planning commission to do anything. I would ask them, but I also think some of these components are in the comprehensive plan already. And maybe Amy could answer a question. And we do pay quite a bit of money to the chamber for our, tourism marketing and whatnot. So why not have them work in conjunction and make it part of the comprehensive plan if it's not good enough as it is? It's just, we have a lot of plans already. So I'm kind of ambivalent about this, but I did want to ask Amy something if possible.
Yeah, Amy, if you could come up.
Mayor, do you mind if I jump in while she walks up here real quickly? I do want to add to this as well, because I agree with Ms. Nelson that yes, there's a comprehensive plan that addresses a lot of this, and yes, the chamber works on the marketing piece of it, and those are things that will be part of this process in developing this plan. So we want this plan to focus on things like, if we get to, more of the tactical details, where if we get 2 or 3 cruise ships in town at the same time and we have this large influx of people, should we consider, shutting down Lincoln Street for a period of time so pedestrians can visit the stores and walk? And, those are the things that we want them to just talk about and bring a plan for, more of the tactical stuff and not the comprehensive level.
Well, in response to that, very quickly, before I ask you my question, we have had 3 ships and sometimes 4 ships, and we figured out how to do it. And it seems like the more plans we have, it's the more resources of people that we need at City Hall to make sure that those plans are being followed. I mean, we look at what's going on right now with our leases, and you told us there's a big problem there. Nobody's had the time to deal with, making the leases stick to the terms or whatever. But my question to you, Amy, is, would it be better to have a separate master plan for tourism, or would it be better to be, I read the comprehensive plan and I see things about tourism and what we want to do. And a plan is just a plan. It's not the law, like the comprehensive plan is, mandated by Sitka General Code or whatever, that we have a comprehensive plan, but it's just a plan, and plans have a habit of changing a lot. So thank you.
For the record, thank you, Mayor Eisenbeis and Assembly members. Amy Ainsley, Planning Director for the City and Borough of Sitka. So I think that the comprehensive plan speaks to a little bit more of just the vision of the role that tourism plays in our economy, but doesn't get down to the tactical level of how we deal with an influx of passengers on certain days. And I wanted to do a little historical research myself, because I remember growing up and having 3-4 ship days, and it didn't seem to be, it was busy downtown, but it didn't seem to be unmanageable. So I went and pulled as many passenger numbers as I could from the Chamber of Commerce. They were able to supply that for us. And the largest passenger year that we've had is around 280,000 passengers in a single season. The forecast that we're starting to receive right now is upwards of 400,000 passengers. And while 2 ships doesn't sound like a lot, the information that we're hearing is that some of the larger ships, and I apologize if I'm getting the terminology wrong, but the Panamax ships that could potentially see can each carry 4,500 passengers. If we had 2 of those ships in a day, that's very different than having 2 of the smaller Holland America ships and what that's going to do to our traffic patterns. The other thing as well is that we used to bring in on large ship days, bring passengers right into downtown. Whereas now we have a much different landscape with how they come into town and how they get transported. So while the comprehensive plan gives us an overall, like I said, that overall vision of how tourism fits into our economy,
I don't think it gets down to the tactical level of what we do about dispersion and making sure that that's equitable, or if not at least equitable, it meets the vision of what Sitka prioritizes, as well as traffic and transportation. So I can completely understand your viewpoint that, you know, we make a lot of plans and sometimes those plans work and they don't, but I think without having this sort of community process about what the vision is and then having those tactical details worked out, at least for a short time frame in that, you know, 1 to 5 year time frame, you know, I think we're going to be a little on the back foot.
Tor?
I guess my first question is, with all these extra meetings of planning, does anybody want to trade to not be the liaison to the planning commission anymore? But no, this makes sense to me. Just if nothing else, just to think about the challenges that we're going to have with 400,000 plus people. I was thinking about the large ships are going to be carrying more people now, and of course they're filling the roads and stuff. And there are going to be some challenges. I mean, for starters, we're not going to be completely able to control what the tourism vendors do. I mean, it's a relatively free country, and we can't necessarily stop them if they want to do something we don't want them to do necessarily. But if we're going to think about things like closing down the vehicle traffic downtown, I think that it's good that we give it some real thought and we give people a chance to weigh in. I hope that we can bring the chamber and the Visit Sitka folks in during the process, both, you know, so that we have an understanding of what some of the vendors are, what some of the companies are talking about doing. And hopefully we can also bring in the McGraws who are going to be setting up the busing and the like. I do also like Valerie's suggestion where you guys make it that you ask them, not direct them. But you know, I first saw this, I wasn't sure what you were looking for, but I like the idea of at least kind of thinking through brainstorming some of the issues that we're going to have and try and mitigate them as much as we can.
Yeah, one of my questions was going to be, who is the planning commission liaison, and if they're willing and able to help facilitate these discussions so that assembly questions are answered throughout that time frame. So
At least till next October.
If it ever does become a burden, will you please let the assembly know, and we can have an alternate and other people help you with that task as well. So, because I believe the liaison is going to be instrumental in this process. Kevin?
Chris, you haven't had a chance to speak yet. Go ahead.
I had 4 bullet points. I had the comprehensive plan, which I think you guys addressed. I had Visit Sitka, which I think you guys addressed. I had whether or not the planning commission was in discussion. I think we now know that we're going to reach out and ask them if they would take this on and kind of own it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I can take our discussion to them next Wednesday. I believe that's the next one. And, you know, I guess I hope that if they say no, we come back and figure out something else. But I mean, hopefully they'll be willing to do it. They're in a little bit of fatigue right now from going through the comprehensive plan. They've been working on that.
And how does this, I'm just trying to figure out, does this fit within the existing twice-a-month meetings, or is this something that they take on outside and schedule additional things to address these tactical categories?
I would think that that's up to them, but.
And Amy may be able to help us with that.
Yeah.
I think just when I saw the motion phrased in the packet, I think the first order of business would be to have a joint session between the assembly and the planning commission to work out some of the details of how the plan would get worked on, setting a very clear scope, setting clear expectations, a timeline, an agreement about how often and how information would be shared between the parties, and then kind of just designating, is the planning commission on its own going to work on it? Are they going to designate a subcommittee or a working group? Are there going to be other members to that group? So I think that there are some structural and process things that need to be worked out between the two bodies. And so I think that would be the first order of business, would be getting that joint session together to hammer out some of those details.
tactical stuff. And then you gave two great examples. You said traffic and transportation. What else would fit within this plan that we're thinking? Do we?
The three main items that come to mind for me are dispersion, traffic, and transportation. And that's not to say that, you know, my view of it is by any means the limiting scope, but just based on the concerns that were raised, it sounds like those are really the items that we need to hit.
Can I add to that answer as well? One small piece that I think is very valuable here is, yes, those goals are wonderful, but there's an overarching piece to that is CPET funds. We talk about CPET funds every year and we hem and haw over what they can be used for and whether or not that qualifies. And if we know the rules on what the qualifications are to use those funds, perhaps those funds can be used to address some of the things in that plan to reach those goals.
Yeah, that was exactly what I wanted to bring up, that, you know, this seems like something that would fit very well within that, or at least has the potential for using a good chunk of those monies to help with this development.
So it sounds as if the assembly is supportive of the idea. There is a potential motion in the packet. Sounds like direct might be a little abrupt, but if there is a motion on the floor, or if an assembly member would like to put a motion on the floor.
I move to request the planning commission to develop a tourism master plan to address the 2022 tourist season and plan going forward.
Second.
Thank you for your time, Amy. It's been moved and seconded to ask the planning commission to develop a tourism master plan for the 22 season and looking forward. Is there any public comment on that?
Richard Ween. I think it's a very good idea. I also think that tactical is kind of a very warlike word, but I wouldn't characterize tourists as being in an invading army necessarily. The important thing is I think this is a first step in dealing with what Sitka wants in the future. And I have mentioned this a number of other times, and this is like the first step, and that's why I agree with it, that we need to have the conversation about where we're going. But in addition to all of this, I think it needs to include not only the tactical aspect, but also the impact aspect. Tactical is movement of people and things in a very real way, but impact, I think, is just as important when you make a tourism plan. Also, you also have to have the environmental impact, which brings up, I'll say, the climate impact of having a number of Panamaxes and others coming into this town, and deals with all of those things. So the irony is that sometimes, as we found out this year, we don't have much say as to what the tourism plan will be. So is it a good idea? Yes, but I would like to believe this is just the first step in dealing with some of these issues. It is more than just figuring out where people are going to go. As a side note, I think whatever happens, it's all in good hands with Amy. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment on the creation of a tourism master plan? Assembly deliberation? Sarah?
Okay, on the motion to request the planning commission to move forward with the creation of a tourism master plan, Mr. Knox,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Ms. Nelson,
Yes.
Ms. Himshoot,
Yes.
and Mr. Mosher.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
That brings us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off of tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes.
Well, I guess this is the time I can talk about lease.
And your name
Again,
for the record, please?
Richard Ween. I would like to bring up the notion that all of these things that you're doing, whether it is water or whether it is a major building, structural and land asset, these belong to the people of Sitka. And again, I do not like the idea of selling it per se, because that takes anything from the future out of our hands. A lease would allow Search to be able to do whatever they wish, long-term lease, but if things don't go as planned, we still have our land and the building in which to plan for the future. I would also like you to remember the Search deal that happened. If you remember the APA, though an assembly member mentioned, well, $100 million or $1. Well, according to the APA, we did give Sitka Community Hospital a lease for $1 a year. So I find that's a bit tongue in cheek. But if you looked at the CAFR, and the CAFR within it also brought up a lot of things about Sitka Community Hospital and where those finances are. But I took a trip down memory lane for the Cerner electronic medical record. And I hope you saw that that's going to be like $550,000 from a very bad and inappropriate deal. But that's still coming back to haunt us. We have the Stark issues. We have all kinds of other things which relate to that hospital deal. And at the end of the day, I'm not exactly sure how much we're going to get from it. So in an effort to think about the citizens of Sitka, it's important that we perform an appropriately devised lease for that land. Because you know what? If things don't go well, maybe we can put up affordable housing. Otherwise, it ain't ours. So bottom line is keep the building. I'm sorry you've moved forward on the Arctic blue water, but hey, you know, it's only water. And I do believe that you are the stewards for Sitka. And you really need to think about not only what today is, but also the future, and not to be bullied into items which are inappropriate for our wonderful community. Thank you.
Is there any other public participation, any item on or off tonight's agenda? All right, seeing none, that'll bring us to reports. A couple things from me this evening. So I was invited to 3 ribbon cuttings at 3 new, or well, they're all new businesses, some in some revamped locations in Sitka, part of the Chambers Restaurant Week, which is hopefully encouraging some folks to get out and order takeout or eat at some restaurants. So those businesses were Sitka Swirls, which is an ice cream truck, Yuyo's, which has taken over the Agave space in the basement of the Franklin building, a Mexican restaurant, and Manjari's, which has taken over the Sitka Hotels restaurant and is serving Italian food there. So that was nice to do. Thanks to the chamber for putting that on. Also had an opportunity to speak at the ASEA conference, which is one of the unions that we negotiate with. It was kind of a last minute request for me to speak there. But the reason I bring that up is because when going through the presentation on what I wanted to talk about, a really important and interesting point came up that I just want people to begin to think about. And part of my speech was the economy of Sitka and how Sitka's doing. And I realized how important childcare is to our economy. We frequently talk about childcare as its own entity, But as witnessed when the schools weren't in session, if people don't have the ability to utilize childcare, they don't have the ability potentially to contribute to our economy. So no actions, no nothing with that. I just think it's something important to think about for the future of Sitka and how we manage childcare and with the overwhelming need here in town. So those are the two things that I had. Administrator.
Yep, thanks, Mayor. A couple things. One, I just want to thank the finance staff for the excellent work on the audit process and with the CAFR. Jay spent years kind of blazing the trail on getting that done. And Melissa took the reins very competently and got us across the finish line and did an amazing job there. So I think congrats is due to our finance team. I'd also like to point out, I got some feedback on the public works reports that are in the assembly agenda. And I'm a fan of the GAR model, the green, amber, red. Or if you've ever used earned value management, one of the things the three things that are important in any project are cost, quality, and schedule. So we revamped that report based on some feedback, and you'll see each one of the projects, and it's got a green, amber, or red color there on cost, quality, and schedule. And you can kind of see what's changed since the last update, and that kind of simplified it for you and gave you a little more of a pictorial representation. But that's all I have. Thanks.
No report tonight.
Thank you. Liaison representatives. Kevin?
I'll just report that Ports and Harbors will be meeting tomorrow night with just one item on the agenda to continue the discussion about a bulk marine fuel tax.
Any other liaisons? All right, Sarah?
I'll just give a rundown of meetings for the remainder of the month. So next Tuesday, the 16th, there will be the public hearing on the sale of the former Sitka Community Hospital building and surrounding property. I will let you know when and where that will be held. There's a budget meeting on Thursday, March 18th, enterprise funds, regular meeting on the 23rd. There will be a 5 o'clock work session prior to the regular meeting with the chamber and Visit Sitka, and then another public hearing on March 30th, followed by a special meeting that week, a budget meeting on April 1st.
Great. We will definitely not see each other in the next 30 days. Any other reports this evening? All right, with no executive session scheduled, brings us to adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.